This is the old course at St Andrews.
And behind me is the Swilcan Bridge, probably the most famous view in all of golfdom. It's the home of golf in the country that invented it. Or is it? Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, and the story of an addiction so bad it's been banned in several places, caused some murders, and at one point it was considered a risk to national security.
But where did it all begin?
Well, that's a wee bit controversial. There are claims it was invented by the Romans and more recently by the Chinese. The earliest written record of something resembling golf isn't actually Scottish at all and comes from over there somewhere, in a landscape that's about as un-Scottish as anywhere can be, the Low Countries. Almost the opposite of Scotland. Although technically that would probably be somewhere with loads of holes. The Council of Brussels banned a game called golf in 1260 with the words, "He who plays golf pays a fine of 20 shillings or his overcoat will be confiscated." Bit harsh. A year after that, there was a mention in a poem about a ball game with a golf, a Dutch word meaning club.
Legend has it that a golf-like game was played every Boxing Day in the village of Lunen in Holland from the year 1297.
Rather than a hole, they had to hit a target a few hundred yards away, in as few strokes as possible. Sounds familiar?
But there's no written reference before the early 19th century. Golf, whatever it was controversial in the early days.
But in 1387, the city of Brel had a charter that banned all gambling, with an exception: to play a ball mitter kolven, with a club, outside the town walls. And 2 years later, the residents of the city of Haarlem were offered a field called De Been, the course, to play games, especially golf, because playing golf in the streets wasn't that safe.
Then in the 15th century, a book of hours showed a game that looked quite a lot like golf.
And by 1650, golf had reached America.
There are records of Dutch settlers playing it in fields and on frozen lakes in the winter in Fort Orange, near modern-day Albany, New York. In December of the same year, that got a bit out of hand when it led to a double murder.
On a cold Monday, having played a cheeky round for some brandies, a party of men arrived at Stephen Yanch's tavern. The losers paid their forfeit to the innkeeper's wife, Maria, and she marked up the amount in chalk strokes on a board. One stroke on the board was worth 2 brandies. She poured a couple of drinks and wiped 2 strokes off the board.
Unlike the spirits, this did not go down well.
It was suggested that maybe she wasn't playing fair. A fight broke out between a whole load of people, but Stephen Jansch and, Dutch people, please forgive me for the pronunciation, Gisbert Cornelius, ended up killing each other. The story goes that they'd both calmed down enough to apologise to each other before expiring. Golf was eventually banned in Fort Orange in 1659 because once again people kept playing it in the streets, causing great damage to the windows of houses and exposing people to the danger of being wounded. Those are just the edited highlights, but I think we can all agree there is a fair bit of evidence to support a Dutch origin. So what's the story? The word golf, which is spelt really weirdly in Old Scots, is thought to originate from the Dutch word for club. The earliest written evidence we have for golf in Scotland appears in an edict issued by King James II, banning it because it was a distraction from archery practice, which was considered a duty for the sake of the defence of the country. Ye golf was banned again, along with football, in 1471 and 1491. It was described as an unprofitable sport, along with all other sports that didn't involve practice and killing people. James IV issued the 1491 ban, but he'd turn out to be a fan. The Lord High Treasurer's 1502, 1503 and 1506 accounts include payments for the King's golf clubs and balls, and other equipment he used when he stayed in Perth, Edinburgh and St Andrews. And the entry for the year 1506 includes the sum of 3 French crowns lost by the king in a golfing bet.
The records of the payments for his equipment are thought to make James the first authenticated player of modern golf.
His granddaughter, Mary Queen of Scots, liked a game as well. She was accused of playing it at Seaton Palace in 1567, when it was said she should have been in solemn mourning for her husband, Lord Darnley, who had just been murdered, conveniently. In 1592, the Town Council of Edinburgh included golf as a list of pursuits to be avoided on the Sabbath, along with, presumably, smiling. Life in 16th century Scotland sounds great. Behind me is Musselburgh Links in Musselburgh, just outside Edinburgh. It's a golf course inside a racecourse. Notes from a lawyer, Sir John Fowlis, say that he played here in 1672. But its roots might go back a lot further. Mary Queen of Scots is said to have played here in 1567. It was a busy year for her. Mary might also be the reason we use the word caddy, with the word thought to have come from French cadets who assisted her when she played the game in France. But the word colf or colve may have referred to something a bit more like a hockey stick. The version of golf some were playing might actually have been a slightly vicious team game, hence the danger and all the banning.
Some historians speculate this was a kind of short golf, played on cemeteries, on beaches, wherever people could.
It may have been a class thing, with the rich playing a game that would have been more familiar to what we know now, and poor people just having a big, mad game in the street with hockey sticks. If you go on descriptions of golf, it would be hard to say it's not very similar to the short game.
And that would make sense. Historically, the Flemish have had quite a lot of influence on Scotland. Over time, though, the long game's thought to have evolved in a different direction.
This is Leith Links, the former home of the Gentlemen Golfers of Leith. It's the site of the first ever international golf competition between the Duke of York, the future James VII, and a George Patterson, playing 2 English courtiers for the rights to claim the game for their own country. The sort of Scottish team won, and Patterson was paid enough money to build a mansion on the Royal Mile. The Gentlemen Golfers of Leith claim to have formed the first golf club here, although it's disputed by the Royal Burgess Golfing Society, which is another Edinburgh club. They have a record from 1834 claiming that they formed a club in 1735. But the Leith Club wrote down rules and introduced a competition with silverware. This is John Rattray, an Edinburgh surgeon who won the competition in 1744 and then joined the 1745 Jacobite uprising, ending up as Bonnie Prince Charlie's personal surgeon. Obviously that didn't go too well, and at the end of it all, Rattray was imprisoned in Inverness and sentenced to death by hanging. But the Lord President of the Court of Session in Edinburgh pleaded his case and managed to get him free. He wouldn't be the last person to call in favours from a golfing buddy. He actually went on to win the competition a further 2 times. But it was here, at St Andrews, at what's now called the Old Course, that the standard 18 holes was born. There are records of people playing golf here as far back as 1552, but it took them till 1754 to form the St Andrews Society of Golfers, so they could play competitions using the Leith Club's rules. 10 years later, they constructed this course. But why 18 holes? Originally, it had 11 holes. The idea was you played the first 11, then you came back and played them again, making up 22 holes. But as the game evolved, it was decided that 2 of the holes were just too short. So it wound up being 9 and 9. It really was that simple. This was the place that set the template, and that's why we still play 18 holes today. Over time, the game was refined here, and as the railways came to Scotland and Queen Victoria became obsessed with all things tartan and built Balmoral, anything Scottish was up for grabs, and golf took off.
Over the next century and a half, around 30 golf clubs and golf societies built on the original 13 rules put together in Leith, adding their own tweaks dependent on the geography of where they played. And in 1899, the now Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St Andrews put together the first set of consolidated rules.
The beginnings of golf undoubtedly do appear to have been in the Netherlands, but the standardisation of the modern game, rules, competitions, professional golf, the game as we know it today, originated in a kind of precise corner of the east coast of Scotland, with its sand dunes and rough seaside grass used as courses when it wasn't much good for anything else. A round here costs £295, roughly $370, and people travel here from all over the world to play, or sometimes just to stand on that bridge with all its history. But here's the thing, it's closed to golfers on Sundays, but it is open to the public and to dogs. It is hard to argue, given the number of people I've seen in the past very rainy hour and a half, that it's not the spiritual home of golf. Really, this old course and that old bridge are places of pilgrimage.